Hi, new friends. My name's Devin. I'm here to share my story about how I was trafficked until I was about 10 years old. I'm sharing my story not only as a therapeutic way for me to process my trauma, but also to inspire others who've experienced such trauma to share their stories too, because 840,000 children go missing every year. And a lot of those children are found, and some of those children aren't found. And this is a lot of the reason why, is human trafficking of children. And people act like it's not happening, or it's not happening here, or it could never happen to my kid. But I'm here to tell you that it is happening here. It happens in your neighborhood to kids that you probably know, and you wouldn't know unless you knew what to look for. And even then, it'd be really hard to spot. So I'm gonna start kind of in the middle of my story, and I'll explain why in a minute. So in my mid-20s, I was the mom of 2 young children, and I started having this really gruesome nightmare about me and about 4 other children standing in line, and we were watching a man instruct and have these toddlers, literal toddlers, demonstrate explicit acts in front of us in a way to teach us. And I also believe there was a camera involved in that instance. I know that in future experiences there were cameras involved. There was done inside this man's home and outside this man's home. There was a lot of children from the neighborhood that were involved in this, and I'm sure some of their parents didn't know. I'm sure most of their parents didn't know what kind of parent would allow that to happen, right? But I told my sister about this nightmare that I was having, and she said, "That's not a nightmare, that happened." And my world kind of like came to a complete stop. It just turned my world upside down, thinking if I could have forgotten this thing, then what else did I forget? And it kind of started making me think about how I have a really good memory, and like a biographical memory of my childhood all the way through to my 20s, to where I was at that time. But I still had these gaps in my memory, and I started thinking about it more and more. And I didn't really remember my mom during that time, even though she was my main caregiver. And I started realizing that maybe I did have a lot more gaps in my memory. And as I started talking to people that knew me at that time, and they would tell me things that happened and I didn't know, like I had no recollection of those things happening. I guess if I hadn't had the first memory that I thought was a nightmare, then maybe I wouldn't have come to the conclusion that I had repressed memories, that maybe it was just normal forgetting. But the fact that I couldn't remember my mom really worried me. And I still to this day don't know how much my mom was involved and how much she knew. But I know as a mom myself that if people were coming to me and telling me that my child was telling them things of a sexual nature that they shouldn't know, I would be very alarmed. I would be very concerned. Hi, Esther. This is my dog, Esther. I would be very alarmed, very concerned, and I would definitely do some investigating myself and get to the bottom of that. That's super scary to hear a child talking like that. But she didn't seem that concerned. Sometimes she would ask me, "How do you know that?" And I would say, "I don't know," which I guess is something a lot of kids say. No. Is that they don't know, but I genuinely didn't know. Because of the way that my memories and myself were fractured from the severity of the trauma. So anyways, because I had the severity of the trauma at this young age, and I was living part of the time with my mom, and for about 2 months out of the year, I would spend with my dad. And so while this was all happening at my mom's house, my dad's house was fine, normal childhood, normal things for children. And so when I would go there, I would say things about things that were going on at home. of like those things that were happening. And of course, this was very concerning to them, and they wanted to get to the bottom of it, and they talked to me about it. And so some of the things that I said at that time were, my grandma was having a talk with me about inappropriate touching and that people can go to jail for that. And I said, well, I don't want my mom to go to the slammer. I would say other things about things that happened, and my dad was so concerned that he filed for custody of me. But everything in the proceedings happened when I was back at home with my mom. And remember, I didn't have those memories when I was with my mom because it wasn't safe for me to remember that when I was with my mom, because that's where the abuse was happening. So when I would go there and I would be questioned about these things that I had said, I genuinely didn't remember anything that I said that had happened. Like, I genuinely didn't remember. And so of course I was like, no, because I didn't know. At the time, my dad thought that I was lying to either him or to these people, and that prevented him from getting custody of me. And I feel like he kind of like had like a resentment because he thought that I was lying, but he knows now that like I really just didn't know and I wasn't lying. It's just the nature of that kind of trauma. And when your self fractures, like I have been diagnosed with DID, dissociative personality disorder, or dissociative identity disorder. It used to be multiple personality disorder. And so I have like a lot of compartmentalized memories and things like that. So sometimes I can remember and sometimes I can't. So that's where my dad came in. Like, he obviously at that point after that didn't know what to do, and he didn't know what the truth was. And so we kind of just carried on life as normal. And I think at that point is when I really forgot, because I knew that there was nothing that I was going to do that was going to save me from the situation that I was in. And my brain just had to learn how to help me function as best as it could while enduring that trauma. So I said before about how the abuse started before I could talk. And another thing that happened when I was on the first Navy base on the East Coast was I started saying things of explicit nature to my dad, and he obviously was concerned and started questioning me. And I named some people who were involved, and whether or not they were, I was a toddler, I don't know. I know that I was about 2 years old, and so I was a very good communicator, but at the same time, like, I was 2 years old. But something was happening, because for a toddler to know these things, something has to be happening that's out of the ordinary. Like, it's not like just something that you know. So they did an investigation, and the Navy decided that nothing was going on. And shortly after that, or maybe while this was happening, I was moved from an East Coast naval base to a West Coast naval base. And that's where things really accelerated to the trafficking. So moving into my teen years, I was having a lot of behavioral issues. I was having a lot of issues with my mom, which some of them were my behavioral issues, and some of them I feel like were a reaction to things that she possibly knew were happening to me as a child, and being afraid that I might say those things as a teen, and somebody would get in trouble or would just open a can of worms that she didn't want to deal with. Because whether or not I was misbehaving, I was always grounded. Like, I was grounded my literal whole teenage years until I didn't live with my mom. So from the time I was like 12 to the time I was like 16 years old, I was pretty much grounded the whole time. The very few times that I wasn't grounded, I would quickly do something to get grounded again. But it could be something as simple as waking up on the wrong side of the bed and now you're grounded for weeks. Just any reason that she could think of. I was on lunch detention per her request through a lot of my high school years too, because she didn't want me to go to lunch with my friends. I didn't get to go to sleepovers or parties or anything like that. And I really do feel like that there was some level of like not wanting me to like talk or see what's normal for other people, so that I kind of just put up with what was going on at home, which wasn't great at this time, but it still wasn't bad enough to warrant like the literal self-loathing that I felt, like the self-hatred, to where I started self-harming. And by the time I was 15-ish, I ended up inpatient at the hospital because of my self-harming. This was like a vacation for me. Like, I felt so much better being at this place and being away from the stress of my mom and my sister, and I just felt like it was a break. And then I went back and it didn't get better. It just I couldn't figure out what was wrong with me and why I was so angry and so like discontent. And once I was in my 20s, I started putting it together, and started realizing, like, obviously why I had all of this self-hatred and self-loathing, and all this deep guilt and shame. And of course, that was like definitely the beginning of a really important healing journey for me. Something that I'm going to be sharing about more in my later videos. But here I just really want to talk more about the trauma of my childhood and how it affected me. And even with the repressed memories as a teenager, I didn't remember what happened, but it was still affecting me like very badly. I just was super depressed, super anxious. I was like one of those kids, like, I didn't want to be alive. Like, ever since I could remember, I didn't want to be alive. Like, I didn't want to delete myself, but I just wanted to fall asleep, and I just didn't want to wake up again. And through this healing journey, I've done a lot of work on self-love, affirmations, reparenting myself because I didn't have the best parenting situation as a child, and really like going back to my little me and like giving her like a hug and telling her it's okay and it's gonna be okay. And I've had a few therapists that have helped me through a little bit. Some DBT has helped with my day-to-day emotional regulation. Crying was like one of the most therapeutic ways that I dealt with and processed my grief. Like crying a lot. Like, I would schedule times to cry, and then I would cry, like ugly cry, for like hours. And it was so therapeutic. I feel like the crying was one of the best things I did to process my trauma. I really, really like dug into it. Listen to sad songs and things like that, even to just like push it along. And then the final straw, because after all of this, like, there's no like before the trauma for me. So it's like, I don't know like what feeling better really even is, but I knew like I felt better, but I just didn't still feel good. I still didn't want to wake up. And then finally I hit my rock bottom in my self-abuse, my substance abuse, my basically just acting in ways that were reflective of my not wanting to be alive. And I ended up getting in a really bad car accident, and I almost died, and I ended up going to jail. And for the first week, I was so angry that I didn't die in that car accident. I was so mad. I couldn't even cry because I was so mad. And then I was sitting on my bunk, and I heard some of the girls having a Bible study, and this is gonna sound so trite, but this is what happened. I felt something so intense and loving, but at the same time it triggered all of that pain in me, and I started sobbing like a baby, which isn't really the best place to do in jail. But the girls were luckily really understanding and prayed with me, and I felt like this instant sense of relief. Like, all of this burden that I've been carrying around all these years that I couldn't get off of me. Like, I could do all this self-work, and I have all these intellectual understandings of how it's okay and it's going to be okay, and like how to deal with it, but it still was just like deep inside of me. And this really just purged that last little bit out. And what I'm going to tell you is it was Jesus. And I'm sorry if that doesn't resonate with you or doesn't align with your path, and maybe it's different for other people, but I know this has been a lot of people's experience, and I can just tell you that it's mine, is that all the healing that I did was great and wonderful and it helped, but Jesus was the missing piece. And accepting him into my life again, because I did grow up Christian, oddly, but having that relationship where I could cast my burdens on him, where I had promise of a better future, that I had promised that he would turn all my heartache and all my hardship into promise and into blessings. And that's true. That has happened for me in 2 short years. I'm 40 now, and I'm living a life that I never thought I could live. I have an amazing boyfriend. I have a great relationship with most of my kids, but that's another story. But they're great kids. And the one thing that I think I can say for sure is that they've never had the abuse that I've had. Their life hasn't been perfect, but I've protected them from at least that. I'm living like financially, I'm like being able to take care of myself, which is something I've never been able to do. Like having a relationship with my family. These are things I could never do before, and I'm so happy to report that healing is possible if you do the work and you work hard at it, and it's a daily thing. And for a long time it's gonna feel like it's all for nothing, but one day it's gonna click and everything's gonna work out. I promise you that. Just work towards it and have a hope for a better future. If you enjoyed my story and you're still listening, please like and share with somebody who you think could benefit from my story. And please subscribe to my channel if you'd like to hear more about my journey from trauma to triumph. Thank you, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.